Now this is refreshing and it's a rarity. A defender who played professionally for nearly 20 years and incurred only 1 red card and just 7 yellow cards. Former West Ham centre-back Tony Gale, welcome. Are those your figures or are they official?
They're official. They're official. It's easier, of course, nowadays to accrue yellow cards, even red cards, but they were still going out, don't worry, not as confetti-like as they are nowadays, but I think it's not one that I'm quite proud of the record, because I wasn't a player who really gave referees a hard time. I never had the back chat or anything like that, and just got on with the game. But my game was based, Alan, more on sort of interceptions. You know, obviously in those days when you had 2 centre-backs, one was an attacker of the ball and one was a kind of sweeper. I would say my role was the kind of sweeper, like a Todd or
so
a Bobby Moore.
Less likely to incur. But even so, sometimes would it be that managers might be a little bit prejudiced against somebody who, you know, had almost a clean crime sheet because they wanted somebody who was really competitive?
Yeah, I mean, you have to go for all kinds in football. You know, as you get older, you know, and I talk to managers or sort of for fellow teammates who are managers. You know, you need players in the side who really lead by example. Some players lead by example by coming up and at them and smashing into people. Some have a calmness about them. I like to think that I was one who had a calmness about me.
It could be a matter of pride, though, for some defenders that they clobbered a few and did get a few yellows and reds, and I'm a hard man. But you obviously tried to play the game fairly. Is that from your upbringing? Is it the West Ham way that influenced you, or what was it?
Yeah, I was lucky. I mean, I was brought up at Fulham. You know, I was at Fulham from 12, made my debut in the first team at 16 alongside players like George Best, Bobby Moore, Rodney Marsh at the time, when Fulham was like a kind of travelling circus. So by the time I left Fulham, I'd played 330 league games and I was only 24. So from 24 to 34, I played at West Ham, played 360, and the last, of course, was at Blackburn in the Premier League. But, you know, at Fulham, I had a good upbringing. I had a good manager. My first manager was Bobby Campbell, and I was taught the right virtues. I was lucky. I played for clubs that wanted to play football the right way.
We'll talk about referees and the way they went about it in those days in a moment, but coming right up to date, you're a high-profile pundit on Sky. And you have to make similar calls to the referees, don't you, really?
Yeah, it's something I love and I really enjoy, because I've always loved doing live games. So started off on radio, and radio gives you a good grounding. 700 live games I did, funny enough, same as what I played for Capital Gold, and we done every major final around the world, from amateur final to World Cup finals, alongside the great Jonathan Pearce. So that taught you the art of talking a lot, which you're aware of, being in the same business. Yeah. So talking a lot and
doesn't mean to say it's always sense.
No, but it's not having dead air, because on radio you can't have dead air. You have to be talking all the time, so there has to be plenty to talk about. And as Jonathan Pearce used to say, you have to paint pictures because people can't see. So after the radio, when we lost the rights, Capital Gold and TV rights went through the roof, I went to Sky, and since then I've been doing live games for Sky. So what you might have got away with on Capital Gold Radio, in your judgment about over-the-line calls or goals or things like that, you can't get away with on TV. You have to generally make the right calls because the public is watching it as well. And you have to talk less, which was another sort of lesson that I had to learn quite quickly, because obviously the pictures are there for everyone to see and you don't have to paint them.
Now, some commentators, and I dare say some pundits, prefer to wait until they've seen a replay 2 or 3 times before they come to a verdict. You're not quite like that, are you?
Yeah, sometimes Sky have said to me, like, hold fire, but what I like to do, because it is make the decision myself, because obviously when there's a penalty decision made or an offside decision made, offside decisions can be very difficult for referees, and particularly assistants, I still call them linesmen now and again, when there's a crossover point. The defence is coming up, a forward's going like that, and that is so difficult for a linesman. So we're doing it from gantries where we've got great vantage points. We're 50, 60 yards up in the air, we can see it, we've got a good line, we've got the advantage of an action replay afterwards, as we have with penalty decisions. But I like to call it, I thought that was offside, or I thought that was a penalty. Sometimes I'm a little bit impetuous and from my radio days open my mouth a little bit too quickly, but I'd like to call it, and then if I've made the wrong decision and the referee's made the right decision, you can say, what a good decision the referee's made. But sometimes there are obvious decisions that referees have got wrong, and you can see it straight away. You can see it from a footballing angle rather than a referee's angle. But we have got the virtue of hindsight, of course, but I do like to call it.
You're taking a risk with your professional integrity.
Yeah, I trust these as the same as referees and assistants. They have to trust their eyes. Obviously, they have got the lines of communication now with each other, and they can hold fire on some decisions and go to their assistants, or in Champions League football, the ones behind the goal, and get a little bit of advice in that. But generally, they're making decisions like that, which is great.
Okay, so what is your impression, your view of the standard of refereeing now?
Well, it's an interesting one, because I don't think we're too bad. Because I do Premier League and Champions League, I get to see Premier League live, I get to see Champions League live. Now, the top European referees are very good. The top Premier League referees are very good. But what we mustn't say is, oh, we need these top European referees doing our games, because we have got our top referees that need to have that carrot. They need to be doing those games for me. They referee well. They go through their stages, leagues, championships, Premier Leagues, and they deserve to be doing the top games in the Premier League. I understand the fact that we want to get better referees over here, but I also understand that we need to bring up the standard of our own referees, because, like players, they do make mistakes, and they've got to learn by their mistakes and from their peers. We have about 4 or 5 top referees at the moment, what I would call in the Premier League, and the other ones are good. But if you actually go to the European and watch La Liga live, or Italian leagues live, French league live, or Champions League live, which I do, there's only about 4 or 5 of those as well. So, and then the rest, I would say, are iffy. And also, what I might add is it's a different game. The Premier League referees are refereeing a different game. Some things they would decide in a Premier League game that they probably wouldn't in Champions League. I'd like to be talking to the lads that do Champions League and Premier League. Do you referee the same way? Are you refereeing under the same kind of guidelines, under the same rules? Because if we brought European referees into our game, I wonder how they'd referee. I really do.
But we've brought foreign players into our game, and they've adapted to our game, or at least the pace.
They take their time, though, don't they?
Yeah, maybe, but they do, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
And isn't it a logical step that we're going to bring the top referees in?
I think we would like the best. What we would like is the best. Now, how you decide what is the best is a very, very difficult call. How you decide who's the best referees, are they able to do Premier League games? Are they able to do Champions League games? Because some of these guys that are doing Champions League games where they're from, shall we say, lesser countries, from Finland, from Iceland, and they're doing Champions League games, they should never be there, because they're not in a competitive nature anyway. They're not in front of full stadiums of 30, 40,000 people when they have to make big decisions. They're not in front of live TV. So I'd always like to see for the Premier League our best referees. But we must remember that they're refereeing Premier League games, and that's a hard one to judge, I think.
Well, you go back a long way with your career, and so does your perspective. I mean, one thing that will have changed is that when you started kicking a ball, there were no cards, no red and yellow cards.
No, there wasn't. There wasn't. It was just the old black book came out, and I'm not sure if there was and probably a pencil, not a pen in those days, and it was normally stuffed down the referee's sock, wasn't it? Which was probably getting a little bit wet during a game, but it was amazing that the way the game was played then, and I think there was more honesty about the game then. There was more communication with referees, there was more communication with players from your own team and the opposition, and I generally think it was a better game then. People say it's a quicker game now. It probably is a little bit quicker because the facilities are better, the pitches are better, the balls are lighter, the boots are lighter, the kit's lighter, so naturally it would be quicker. But I definitely think there was a better technique to playing football in those days, and probably a better technique to refereeing a game as well.
Do you raise a question mark then against what we now accept to be red and yellow cards? Again, it would look strange if there weren't any, but you talk about communication, and if you're sending a guy off without a red card in your armoury, you're actually having to communicate with him to get him off the field. So have we lost, to some extent, that communication?
I think we have lost a lot of communication, and if you have more communication, you get more respect as well. So the more communication, more respect. the thing with referees. We're talking about a refereeing angle. I think they should be going around Premier League grounds. They shouldn't be allowed to referee maybe the Premier League ground where they're doing their work, so to speak, where they're indulging with the players every day. I mean, there's small-sided games for players every single day in training sessions. The pace of the game is so important. Why aren't young referees refereeing games in Premier League training sessions for me with Premier League players? Because then the players know what to do in training, what offences they're causing. If there's new rules being brought in, then young referees are telling them about the rules. Young referees are gaining experience. I'm not saying present day referees should be in there because it might cause bias, but you could bring young referees up by taking them to training grounds.
That's a great point to finish with. Tony, thanks ever so much.
Cheers,
Great
Al.
stuff.
Thank
Cheers.
you.